to those watching, to the Dclinpsy admissions conversation about the admissions process. My name is Ashley Pert, and I'm a clinical psychologist that works in staff wellbeing, but also supported in founding the Seeing is Believing YouTube channel that aims to address the lack of access and information about the clinical psychology profession for people from racially minoritized backgrounds. So today we're going to be holding a conversation about the admissions process for the clinical psychology doctorate in the hope to provide some clear guidance and reassurance about the admissions process and demystifying it as well, because sometimes there can be a lack of information around or common myths about can you actually get onto training as well. So hopefully by the end, you'd feel kind of empowered if you're an aspiring clinical psychologist to pursue this career and also think about your kind of unique experiences that you can draw on when applying for the doctorate. So I'll start with the round of introductions. So who wants to go first?
I'm Rachel Terry. I'm the admissions lead for the Salomons Doctorate in Clinical Psychology. And I've also recently become the co-chair of the selection subcommittee of the group of trainers in clinical psychology.
I'm Abby Dunn. I have a similar role, so I'm the admissions lead at the University of Surrey.
And hi everyone, I'm Mark Ballham. I'm the Programme Manager for the Doctorate in Clinical Psychology at King's College London, the IoPPN. So I look after the operational side of the Dclin programme, but also heavily involved in the selection process. And I'm also a board member for the Clearinghouse charity.
Hi everyone, I'm Shipa. I'm an assistant psychologist with the Valued Voices mentoring scheme, and I work with Ashley and Shah and Kat, and I'm also training to be a clinical associate in psychology.
Thank you, everyone. And we also just wanted to acknowledge that Dr. Kat Alcock, the founder of the Valued Voices mentoring scheme, and Dr. Shah Alam, the coordinator of the mentor scheme, also helped to bring this project to life. So we, kind of acknowledge and thank them for their support as well. So before we start, we will have a chance to kind of have a conversation and think a bit about questions today that will be hopefully helpful. So what we would begin with is just thinking a bit about, we're aware that we're speaking to you all from different courses around the London area and the Southeast area, and there may be similarities and differences between your approach to admissions. So it may be helpful for those watching to hear from any of you, how would you describe your course's ethos?
Oh, I can jump in. So, because this is something we've actually been thinking about as a department recently, so it's probably quite live for me to talk about. I think that we are sort of focused on building a supportive training centre, one which, we want all trainees to thrive, we value difference, and that's, a range of differences. But one of the things alongside all of that that we have come to really kind of think is important is thinking about what is the role of a clinical psychologist. What does that mean going forward for the profession as a whole? And one of the things that we've kind of landed on as really important is the embedding of research within that, and our desire to have trainees and to support trainees to share in that ambition, actually, to think that research is going to be sort of fundamental to how they practice and how we can have leadership through clinical psychology.
That's so interesting, Abby, to hear about what you're thinking at Surrey.
I know, because we talk sometimes, don't we, Rachel? So it's we should probably have a catch up, actually. But yeah, so that's become part of, we're changing some of our assessment processes this year. We're moving to a face-to-face and a kind of multi-component assessment, and that's to kind of embed some of those elements, actually, too.
I mean, it's interesting because, like you say, we all probably have slightly different emphasis on our program. So if we're talking about the Salomons program, I guess what we would say our ethos would be sort of multi-model. So we try to have teaching on systemic therapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, CBT therapy. They all get allocated the same amount of time, which I think is a plus and a minus, because it means you're getting a taste of lots of different models, but you might get less in-depth training in one particular model. We also have a strong emphasis on reflective practice. So our trainees every fortnight have an hour and a half of reflective practice. And we also have a strong emphasis on service user involvement. And more recently, I think one of our emphasis is around anti-racism, and we have a anti-racist thinking space once a month approximately for all of our trainees. So I would say that they're the main things at the moment that we would kind of define ourselves by, and those things are very present, I think, in our selection process as well. So we have experts by experience on all of our selection panels, and we're trying to ensure that our selection panels are as diverse as possible. But I'm sure we'll get onto some of this later. But
Thank you, Rachel.
I suppose for us, I suppose when you just talk about modalities, I suppose at our course we are CBT heavily focused on things reflecting the Maudsley in particular, but we also have more focus on systemic therapy. That doesn't mean that we don't teach other approaches, it's just they're the main ones reflecting the local area. Our selection process in course generally is very values-based, again, working with difference and working with diversity. But I suppose that as it's a doctoral degree and the IoPPN is quite research strong, we do have an emphasis in the process on research skills. This doesn't mean you have to have a PhD or a master's degree, for example, but we do look at candidates who may have done dissemination of their research work or audits in their clinical work, for example. I think we're always evolving in a certain way. So obviously we have reflective practices, many courses do. We have a diversity spaces as well. So we have dedicated sessions on whiteness in clinical psychology and support groups for our minoritised students as well. But we also have a steering committee for CED&I across the course, working with local trusts to improve across every area of the course.
That's really helpful to hear. Thank you, everyone, about some of the similarities and also the differences, but kind of how values underpin that throughout all the courses as well. And some of you did describe a bit about the admissions process, and we can acknowledge that we're speaking with you all in November in 2024, and when these videos are released, then we can understand that things may change between context and time with the admissions process. But for now, would you be able to just briefly describe your course's admissions process for home fee and irrelevant international applicants?
I'll go first this time, and then maybe the next question I'll not going to win first. So we only have we don't have any fee paying places at Salomons, so all of our places are NHS funded. Interestingly, I suppose one thing that we do that might be different to some courses is we don't use the qualitative information on the application form. So the lengthy answers we don't use. We just use the application form to check that people would meet our minimum entry requirements. So in terms of, do they have a year of relevant work experience? Have they got the right academic qualifications? And then all of those that meet our minimum entry criteria get put through to our online test stage. Where they would sit two tests. One is a research skills test and one is a kind of clinical decision-making test. And then the top scoring at that stage would get through to an interview stage. So that's kind of a brief summary of our selection process. I can go into more detail if needed, but that's the kind of headlines.
Thank you.
With us, I suppose, we actually published the 7 steps on our clearinghouse page. But we do continue to revise it per year based on the data that we have. But just to show that the first stage, I suppose, is we do have a lot of applicants, but the first part is that we screen out applicants who don't meet the minimum criteria. For clarity, we do take 41 at the moment home NHS funded trainees and 3 international students per year. But it's all based on the same selection process for both home and international fees applicants. And we do rank candidates based on academic achievement. And just for clarity for those watching is that you aren't screened out basically if you don't have lower A levels, for example, or a low master's degree or undergrad, but it brings into account when we go for the next stage of shortlisting. So candidates who don't have a minimum of 12 months full-time equivalent research, clinical or clinically relevant research experience would be screened out at that stage also. And candidates who don't have any research experience, so it doesn't have to be PhD or master's, but some research experience post-undergraduate degree. And then when it gets to the form rating stage, the application forms are completely anonymized, all academic information is taken out, and 2 raters score them blindly. And then the two scores in academic achievement and clinical experience is put together, and we interview the top ranked members. For the interview process itself, each application panel has an expert by experience on the panel, so either a service user or carer, and we always have at least one racial ethnic minority interviewer as well on each panel. And then after that, top 20 candidates per panel are often placed with a firm reserve list. We also, during the process, apply positive action, both in the shortlisting stage and at the interview, based on 3 different points. And this year, we've introduced contextual admissions as well. So candidates with a certain number of contextual factors will receive boosted scoring in the process.
Thanks, Mark. Shall I jump in? So I might not give quite as much detail, partly in honesty, because we're still refining our process for this year. So this is coming at a kind of a stage where it can't be that concrete, I suppose. But what we do know is that we're going to get lots of applicants soon. So we've got a screening process that we put in place, which will be looking at the statements from trainees. And that's looking at sort of some competencies, but also about sort of their reflection in terms of competencies. We want to move beyond a sort of what's the word? Tokenistic. So for instance, tokenistic reference to ideas and concepts, and really thinking about showing some reflective capacity there about those experiences. Following that, we run interviews, and that's going to take the form of an assessment day or an assessment part of a day, which we will be now involving in some capacity trainees. Our lived experience advisory panel will be involved, and our external examiners and our internal assessors, I should say, not examiners. I'm very Viva orientated at the moment for some reason. So you'll have a real mixture there. So we're hoping that through that, I mean, part of the reason that we've decided to make this change to our approach from just a straightforward panel interview, which was on Zoom last year, is that we want to give trainees the opportunity across the range of ways they'll be assessed to show different aspects of their skill and competency. I think the narrow focus of a panel, some people are very good at giving interviews or have been well supported to deliver good interviews. That doesn't necessarily reflect their overall abilities in training. So we want to give more opportunities to shine, I suppose, by having these different ways of assessing.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear. Thank you all. And I know there was a mention about contextual admissions. I wondered if, for people who may be watching that don't know what that is, would anybody be able to just briefly describe what contextual admissions means, and yeah, kind of why that then would be considered within the admissions process as well?
Well, we may all probably be using it quite differently, but the application form from the Clearinghouse now collects what's called contextual admissions information from applicants if they're willing to share that. And it's mainly about indicators of sort of social disadvantage. So, you know, disadvantages that people may have faced in their life. So the contextual, we have, it sounds like a similar process to the IoPPN in terms of how we use that information. So we are also having a contextual admissions process, and the items that we use as part of that are people that are care leavers, people that are refugees, and people that have been in social disadvantage, so people that have received free school meals in childhood, or people that have been on receipt of benefits during childhood. So they're the indicators that we use on the Salomons course, and we apply those where applicants are tied. So if an applicant is tied on their score, for example, after the interview, and they met one of those contextual admission factors, they would go above an applicant that didn't have any contextual admissions factors. So that's how we're using it at the Salomons programme. But I think all the programmes use it slightly differently.
Yep.
We also, we have historically and will continue to engage with tied scores using that method as well. I think that's not uncommon across training centres. Actually, when I've been talking to people, it's a point in which that's taken into account, isn't it?
Oh, great, thank you. That's really helpful to know. And also just for the answers about just understanding a bit about the admissions process and what is kind of demanded of trainee, like prospective trainees, but also what's considered for applicants as well. And
can I just say, Ashley, as well, because you asked about contextual admission factors, but Mark also really helpfully referred to the protected characteristics. And I guess people I didn't, until I started working in selection, didn't know what that was either. So I don't know if everybody would know what that is. So that's under the Equality Act. Employers or people doing selection can use characteristics under the Equality Act that are underrepresented within the selection process where applicants are tied. So again, for us, the protected characteristics that we use are sex, because we know that men are underrepresented in the profession, disability, because we know that those with disability are underrepresented in the profession, and also minoritised ethnicity. So those that are coming from an ethnic minority, also we would use that as one of the protected characteristics within our selection process. And it sounds like, Mark, you've got 3, so you're probably using the same 3.
It's exactly the same, but we prioritise it based, I think it's minority status first, then disability, then gender, but it will be based on usually the local area of underrepresentation, but sometimes nationally. I suppose for clarity though, that it has to be equal scores, and at the moment, because positive discrimination is illegal in this country, that they can't do it in a different way.
Thanks, Rachel, for clarifying that as well. And leads us to the next question, and thinking then about we mentioned actually minoritized applicants, and we wondered actually many aspiring clinical psychologists from racially minoritized backgrounds may feel discouraged by the lack of visible diversity in both the profession and on kind of core staff teams on clinical psychology courses. And this may happen even with watching today's video. So we wanted to ask you, how does your course work to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for trainees, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds, and acknowledging what work still needs to be done?
Well, I think you've started. I have gone first again. Sorry. I think you have started there with an acknowledgement that work still needs to be done. You can see here, there's 3 white selection tutors here for this meeting, and I definitely think in terms of looking at our staff team at Salomons, for example, you know, there is much of a more white staff. So there's definitely work to be done. But that's not to say that we're not doing a lot of work and thinking at Salomons about you know, access to the profession and also making it a safe space once you're on training. So we're doing things like we're thinking about placement allocation. So we wouldn't be asking our racially minoritized trainees to go to placements in all white areas, for example, because our patch covers East Kent, for example, where there isn't so much racial diversity. So we wouldn't necessarily we'd be thinking about that in our placement allocation. We're also introducing, we've started doing cultural competency training for our placement supervisors. And this year, for the first time, we're going to have that as something that trainees are thinking about with their supervisor on their placements, and that's part of the kind of placement process. We're asking supervisors and trainees to think about having conversations around diversity and cultural differences. As I said earlier, we've got anti-racism thinking spaces across the 3 years of training, and one of the things that our programme do is that we have separate spaces for those that are from an ethnic minority, so that they're not being asked to do the work and the thinking for everybody, that they've got their own space for that. We've also introduced relatively recently an EDI committee, so that we're trying to think about all the different aspects of our programme as a whole, rather than just thinking about selection or just thinking about teaching. We're trying to think about all the different elements of our training and what have been perhaps our blind spots before. So that's just some of the stuff that we're doing. I know all of us are trying in this area. Be interesting to hear what others are doing.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think you kind of tapped on something. I was speaking, we have an EDI lead in my team, and we were talking about this process, this interview before then, about this idea that it's, you know, it's departmentally, it's within the curriculum. We need to think about this. It's in supporting students in placement. At you, Rachel, I think there's, you know, we're focused on supervisor training in anti-racist practice. And I think we are aware that it would be naive to think that there aren't ever instances where minoritized trainees have experiences which are not acceptable. And so we're very focused on supporting those trainees in that situation, you know, to advocate for them, to ensure that they feel safe, because I think that's really key. We're also sort of work with the trust in terms of that too. You know, we are a partnership with the place, you know, it's not just an academic training course, is it? You know, we're part of a collection of stakeholders, and we want these values to be spread across with our other stakeholders. But I suppose within the course that we deliver, we're revising and evaluating our curriculum across the board to really think about EDI as a core component, and we're also sort of bringing it in right at the beginning, so it's there front and center as trainees come in, as part of the conversation and understanding that the cohort has as they move forward into the other aspects of training. I could go on, but I'll obviously let Mark come in too, because I just think it's just really important that you think about it in a multifaceted way, as you said. I said I was going to stop talking, and then I didn't. So that, Mark, I'll let you join.
I suppose I think every course could probably say they're doing a massive amount of this work, which is always developmental. I don't think any course is going to be perfect. I think for us, particularly in CD&I, we do have a dedicated committee that's led by our 2 CD&I leads, and we also have dedicated principal tutors that help try and improve across all areas of the course. So they look at the long-term strategy, but also ensuring policies and procedures are embedded. Some examples would be the support for trainees within the teaching spaces. So we have a dedicated diversity inclusion teaching stream, but also encourage lecturers to embed it in every single teaching session. So our teaching feedback form for every lecture has a dedicated question to whether the lecturers have included it, but ways they can improve their practice in the long term, and this is reviewed each year. Supervisor training, we have just completed a suite of the cultural competency training in conjunction with SLAM. And we do have in our placement contract a specific point where they have to plan to help trainees learn in working with difference and diversity and support in that way. And we do a wellbeing survey every year as well for our students based on NHS staff survey, which looks at incidents such as bullying, harassment, discrimination. And we use that to improve the resources available. So recent examples would be that, as well as the reporting routes within Kingswell Partners and KCL, that we have our own dedicated staff member to help support trainees with these particular issues in that way. And then also embedding it in different areas such as research proposals, for example, making trainees think about that a lot early on. We've dedicated support groups for minoritised trainees at lunch where they can talk about their experiences and help us improve in that way. So it's always quite dynamic and we take it forward. But I think, unfortunately, clinical psychology training, things may not always be as quick as we can hope. But everyone I'm aware in every course is working very hard in this area. So.
It's just so, I mean, it's just thank you actually for bringing us together so we can hear what each other's doing as well. Because I think we've got so much to learn from each other. Rather, you know, I think it's a real opportunity, isn't it, for us to take things back to our own teams and flag, you know, where we can improve compared with another setting.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful because even just hearing from you all, just hearing that despite some of the kind of common challenges, the different ways that are to kind of try to overcome them in innovative ways, but also speaking to trainees themselves and ensuring that actually the environment itself is as supportive as it can be. Because I think that's the challenge sometimes when, I guess, before you get onto the course, you have your hopes maybe for what it might be like. And I guess you can read on the Clearing House website the kind of ethos or the approach that courses are taking for people from racially minoritized backgrounds, but that's different to then still experiencing it. But it sounds like, yeah, the kind of proactive approach and consistently shifting the ways that trainees are supported is important.
I suppose just thinking about the photos, if you think about cohort makeup or even staff, I think staffing is difficult partly due to underrepresentation in the profession generally, which got particularly in senior level positions. So we do positive action in the recruitment processes itself, whether the shortlisting interviews, but also encouraging minoritised applicants to apply. I know for selection, is all I can say is that a photo doesn't, particularly on Twitter, for example, doesn't tell the full story of the process, neither does the published clearinghouse data, because that only goes through three different bits. So one example that I know is that we do our own in-depth analysis per year, and we're aware, for example, that 10% of applicants don't meet the minimum criteria, so that changes the makeup at that point. But clearinghouse will only say who applied and who at the end. So things do change, and if a course may not have minoritised trainees in it, doesn't mean that they were offered a place or was nearly that successful. They might have gone elsewhere. So there's a lot of different things to think about in context that is not always available.
There's a bit different, but it made me think something that we've done, which I've really thought has been really fed back in a really positive way, which we've sort of purposefully had question and answer sessions at different stages of selection with trainees from the global majority, but the protected spaces for trainees to have conversations and actually investigate what the course might be like, and it's kind of purposely a safe space for those conversations. And I think there's points like that during selection where you can support the process for some participants, for some trainees who otherwise might have that uncertainty about what will it be like when I join this training centre. I think, you know, that is a really key question, isn't it? Because actually we are slightly black boxes in a way that, you know, nobody quite knows what's going on within them. And so the more ways that you can kind of allow people to have a frank and honest conversation so people can make informed decisions is really key.
And kind of like safe enough decision to support them.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm now going to move over to Sheepa, who's going to ask some more questions.
Okay, so it's been really interesting to hear what you've had to say so far. These next two questions are kind of similar, but the first would be, there can be lots of myths about the admissions process online and between peers, and just wondering what you'd like to clear up that might be helpful for aspiring clinical psychologists to know. When we did a survey to understand more about this, we kind of found out that some people were worried about the fact that they might have less traditional work experience. Somebody also brought up the fact that they thought maybe I need to work with different population groups. Is my work not valuable? So I'm just wondering if you would want to clear up any myths.
I'll go. Well, I've got one, which I think, Mark, you touched on slightly, which I think is the myth about what you need in terms of your research experience or qualifications. Because I think there is a myth that actually if you have a PhD, then that's going to be a shoo-in, or that it's necessary to have a PhD. I know that sometimes that's talked about in regard to certain training centres as well. So I think it's quite useful to say that, you know, we, and I think probably I can speak, we all want people who have an interest in active engagement with research. But that doesn't mean that you need to go away and get a PhD or a master's necessarily to show that. And there are other ways that you can show that commitment and engagement that are more manageable and less costly.
I would definitely echo that.
Yeah.
And also that myth, Sheepa, you were talking about should I get lots of different types of experience? I definitely don't think that more is necessarily better. It's your ability to kind of learn from the experience you have got, reflect on the experience that you have got. And also we value paid and unpaid experience equally. So you know, we recognise that some people don't have the opportunities to do unpaid roles. And certainly it wouldn't have to be assistant psychologist roles. We equally value other kind of roles in settings where clinical psychologists might work. So it might be a healthcare assistant on a mental health ward, for example. It might be working in an older people's care home as a healthcare assistant. It doesn't have to be assistant psychologist roles, which we know are like gold dust, and not everybody has the opportunity to get those roles. Yeah.
I suppose on the clearing up myths, I suppose that when I first started 13 years ago, the myth was that you always had to have a PhD to get onto our course. That still is the case. No matter how many times we present the data in an information evening, for example, saying about 5% or 10% per year have one, it still has that myth pertaining. I think a lot of applicants will only believe it when we get our students at these events talking about the diversity in the cohort and talking about diversity of experience in the clinical field and research or whatever. Then they'll start believing it. And we do every year refine our guidance in a way. So we clearly say on our clearinghouse profile, we've got a Padlet site as well, what roles that we would consider relevant experience and what may not be. Some roles are still, well, some roles may still be relevant, but we do try and inform candidates that because we have so many applicants that there are some roles that might be more valued, but assistant psychologist roles aren't the gold standard. You can get that experience. So we generally say clinical experience should involve some experience of, say, assessment, therapy, or intervention. And that's what we're sort of looking for in that way. But I encourage all candidates to read the websites, and it is refined every sort of year, so you can help in that way. And we also say what might be valuable research experience and whatnot.
I think with the experience as well, I think there's something about thinking as an applicant that the experience that you get is also to inform your decision making about whether this is a career for you. So it's not just about us kind of screening people based on what a candidate may or may not have done, but also, you know, we want you to have some form of relevant experience so you have an understanding of what the role might involve. You know, we know that training can be really hard. We know that it creates challenges. And I think sort of having an understanding of the clinical context is really important when you are going to be on placement very rapidly and operating in that context with responsibility. So I think there's both sides of it. So it's for us, but I think it's also for potential trainees.
I suppose that, I suppose that for our course, which is every course is different, so they do accept, say, undergrad applicants before, that we have a lot of applicants anyway, so that it's quite challenging for that period. But we do say that you are going into a band 6 NHS role, which is more than a qualified nurse at grade 4. So it's a challenging program and it's quite intensive. And so we are looking for that trainees can manage those demands because it's a balancing research, doctoral level research degree as well as the clinical side. So we do think that if you're just applying straight after undergrad for our course alone, that you may not be ready for that position, but other courses will be different.
We've just this year changed our criteria on that. So you could apply when you were still doing your undergraduate degree, but we now for this year, so you have to have your degree outcome at the time of your application now.
So one thing that we do, I think it's difficult for many courses to provide individual feedback to every single applicant. We give telephone feedback for every interviewee, whether they're successful or not. But for candidates who are unsuccessful in the earlier stages, we can't provide individual feedback for everyone, but we have 3 different individualized feedback letters. So one would tell candidates if they haven't met the minimum criteria, so that can help them learn for future applications. If academic achievement may have been the main reason for that, and so that might help them choose a different course such as ours. But we also state that other candidates in the third letter may have been preferred due to clinical and research experience, but we will say what the average experience from the previous cohort was coming into the course.
That sounds like a really helpful process to guide someone to making different decisions the next time around, or just feeling like they have more of a direction to go down. And thank you for your answers. It's really helpful to know, especially as there's lots of questions around kind of a master's being more valuable, having research experience is more valuable, and having that advantage, and the pressure to study further, which not everybody has access to as well. And that kind of brings me on to my next question. As a course, what do you think might make an application stand out?
I've got an answer to this because it really struck me, this question. And in a way, I think you're right, Shiva, that it does relate to the question before, because I sort of think it's a bit of there's mythologizing around this about the idea of the ideal candidate, or there's just this one thing that you can do and that will open the door to training for you. And I don't think that's right. I think, you know, if I look through our cohorts, we've got people from, you know, a range of professional backgrounds. We've got former social workers. We've got somebody who was a musician, was their profession before they came on. You know, we've got people with varied levels of research experience, people with lots of publications, people who have no publications, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. And I think there's a minimum requirement, but beyond that, I think there's no one thing. And it's about kind of reflecting on who you are and what you bring that's really important. And I suppose in relation to that, and I don't know if you don't get on, it may not be because you don't have this one thing that you needed. It could be a combination of factors. And related to that, it's just not the end of the world. Like, it feels like it. And it's such a brutal process in that way for people, particularly if they apply multiple times. But use that time to reflect and, you know, and really think about it, but don't assume it's because you failed to tick one very specific box. I think Mark's feedback might be really helpful, and maybe there are sort of minimum requirements, but if you meet the minimum requirements, then, you know, there isn't necessarily something you need to go away and do that's that concrete.
And we at Salomons don't really use the application form other than to meet the minimum criteria. So there wouldn't be something on the form that we were looking for. So I guess it's more once someone's got to an interview stage, what are we looking for? And I think one of the things would be, obviously it's an NHS funded programme. We hope that clinical psychologists will stay in the NHS once they finish, or stay in third sector organisations. So I think there is definitely a passion we were looking for in terms of the NHS and NHS working, and the NHS values. So that's definitely something that we're thinking about, and also authenticity, which is easy to say and probably hard to do, but we want to get a real sense of the person and what they're bringing and their difference. What we don't want is a robot who's practiced their answers, heard what the questions are going to be and practiced them to death, kind of thing. And it's very easy to say that and probably harder to do, but that's certainly some of the things. And as Abby has said, also an ability to kind of reflect on your experiences and learn from them. Think about you as a person, your life experiences and what you're bringing and what you've gained from your experience so far. So they're definitely some of the things that we're kind of looking for and that can make people stand out potentially.
It's interesting because I manage the inbox for a lot of people who want to apply in the future. They say, is this course perfect for me, is this job? And our general response is that as long as it's relevant to the field and it's something you want to do that. So do something that you like to do and work in, rather than thinking it's perfect for the course, because you'll enjoy it more, but you'll also won't feel it that way. But so a lot of people will say apply when you're ready. And when talking about the Band 6 role, I suppose for us, we wouldn't recommend applying straight after undergrad for that reason. But we do look at the capacity for self-reflection in all of your progress, all of your work after graduation. And if you, I suppose for us, if you don't have the experience to reflect on, that may be a weakness in the application itself. So we would say consolidate your experience, consolidate those skills, and then that'll shine in the application when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm also wondering, what do you think might be some do's and don'ts? What might you read that you think that would lead you to believe somebody might be ready versus somebody who might not be ready to interview?
We have lived experience on our interview panel. I suppose we are looking for candidates that can speak in a way that's not too much research jargon, I suppose, or too many acronyms in this sort of way, bearing in mind that our trainees start placement 3 weeks into the program. We're not expecting you to be the performance of clinical psychologists, but we're expecting you to be in a room with a service user and speak with them at that point. Other things, I suppose, we use references as part of our shortlisting as well. So if you've never seen Clearinghouse, you can check the templates and see exactly what the referee is going to answer for you for the clinical and the academic side. So when you are choosing your references, this is for our course, not all of them, is select someone who you think can answer those questions well, because that may help you in the process.
I suppose in response to the other question, we're looking for, and I think, but we would all say the same, we're looking for people who can reflect on their experiences. So it's not just what you've done, but how you can sort of make meaning of that and apply it in terms of in your interview. I think another thing that sort of stands out for me, particularly when you're reading a massive volume of applications, because we do read the statements, is moving beyond a sort of description of what you do and what you have done to think about actually the client, the patient, the wider society sort of benefits of that. So I think I think the process in some ways, particularly writing those very brief statements, candidates are really trying to tick the boxes in terms of what we might have as competences if we are using them. But of course, what we're looking for people is thinking about, what is beyond what you can do now. And I think that's really important. And I think that in interview and that in your statement really makes a difference. And it's really noticeable when it's absent as well.
It's a really interesting point. It can be quite vulnerable to reflect on your experiences when you're overcoming a challenge sometimes, but it's really important to show. I've seen in job applications, even when I was applying for the CAPIT role, to say what I've learned from it rather than what I have done. So it's less process orientated.
And certainly kind of in an interview process, being able to bring in examples to illustrate your answers, drawing on your experiences, is something that's quite impressive when applicants are able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'll hand over to Ashley now.
Thank you, Shipa, and thank you everyone so far for your rich perspectives. And I'm already kind of seeing the benefit of just having people speak from different courses, because actually just seeing what is similar, what's different as well has been really useful so far.
Yeah, very much like what Abby said, it's so interesting, like hearing what everyone's doing, and so it's really nice to have it as a conversation and hear the differences and stuff. So yeah, I'm finding it interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I know, because you don't get much chance to do it, I think, in a way. I think this is the kind of information that your audience is looking for as well, because obviously we all want to make our courses sound like nice and good. We want to sound reasonable ourselves. We're interested in what each other says, there's all these things, but obviously we're doing it for a kind of purpose. So I just wanted to make sure that we're kind of hitting the kind of areas that you want us to, I suppose.
Yeah, it feels like it's kind of really, I think what it is, already listening, just kind of like demystifying a lot of the things. I think you even mentioned just the important point about actually there isn't just one application, like one perfect candidate. And I think sometimes there's so much pressure for people to feel like they need to say things in a particular way, but also what is I think what's coming across also from you all is that you're valuing the whole person, and that sometimes can often get missed too in conversations about this.
Definitely. I understand the aspect of like explaining how your course works, and I think that's going to be really helpful to hear, other than reading it on a website, and the fact that you're all trying to add to it and explain why things are done in a certain way. I think it will just help bridge that gap of knowledge that a lot of people don't have, especially coming into this for the first time.
Yeah.
It's a hard process, isn't it? I think we, even in this side of it, you kind of sometimes, you lose sight of that, that there's people who maybe applied multiple times, they're kind of putting their professional life slightly on hold whilst they go through this process. There's a lot invested in it. And I think anything we can do to kind of support them to be really, I suppose, forgiving to themselves about that. And maybe, I don't know, I don't want to put people off, so maybe I won't say it, but I do, when I was thinking about it, I do kind of almost want to say as well, that it's not the only way, that I think sometimes as a take home, it's like, yes, put a lot into it, but you know what, if it doesn't end up being your profession, you'll be able to have a really meaningful role doing something else that perhaps taps the same kind of drives that you have. But I might not say that because maybe it's not the place for it.
No, I think it's important to name as well. I think even for myself, when I was on the journey, I think you have to understand also like what it's important to look after yourself and your well-being, because it's not the only way that you can reach fulfillment in your profession. Yes, of course, you want to do the things that you have your hopes on, but then actually the richness and broadness within mental health professions and the different ways you can kind of support people and services can be so broad. So yeah, I think it is important to name as well.
And that point actually, which is, I don't know if you think, Mark, Rachel, Ash, all of you, but sometimes I think as well, because so much is invested in the process of applying, actually what happens after that isn't as considered. And, you know, the analogy, I don't know if it's a very good one, is almost like sort of if you're having a baby, you think a lot about the birth, but you don't think about afterwards, because that's, you know, and I think that in a way for candidates who maybe don't get on, one of the things they can do is take that time to think about, okay, so what's it going to be like afterwards? And I think that's something I'd like people to take away, is that take your thinking beyond just the application process. You know, and hopefully these videos give them some help around that too, of just being able to think, well, what are training centres actually like? What's it going to be like when I'm on training, beyond what's it like to get through that process of interviews and things.
I think we found out that with some trainees afterwards, this is in general, is that they put the course on such a pedestal that when they start, it's always
can't quite live up to it. Yeah.
No, not at all. But
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And the other thing, I suppose, is just going back to when to help candidates through the process, is I would say being in control of our Twitter account is stay off social media, particularly during the application thing, because it's very anxiety provoking, but actually a lot of the misinformation is out there as well. So
yeah, it's a really good point. That's a really good point. Even when the sort of offer letters start to go out and things, you know, and people are kind of obviously understandably saying they've got offers, we get lots of people messaging saying, you know, have I not got a place? Have I got a place? You know, it raises the level of anxiety around the whole process, doesn't it? And it's not, you know, we haven't issued our offers yet. Neither answer is correct, you know.
So just going back to the master's point earlier as well, which is leading into the next bit about challenges and barriers, I suppose, is that thinking about whether people need to have a master's or not, because I'm the person that goes through the equal opportunity data, but every single bit for all applicants and how we do it is in the past few years, we have about 70% of all applicants have a master's degree. And so when it comes to the alternative handbook of ours and it says that more people have a master's degree, usually it's because the majority of candidates do have it, rather than it's the main thing that we're looking for in every candidate. So, but you don't need a master's degree, it's just lots of candidates do.
You have them, yeah, that's the difference, isn't it, actually?
Certainly for our programme, you wouldn't get, as long as you met our minimum criteria for academic requirements in terms of your undergraduate degree, for example, you wouldn't get any extra points for having a master's at all. So it would, from our point of view, make no difference. It might help inform your answers in an interview or your thinking in an application or your readiness for training, definitely. So I'm not saying don't do a master's, but in terms of scoring for getting on for our Salomons, it wouldn't make any difference.
I suppose it's the thing which is, because we look at the academic, clinical and the stuff in tandem, it doesn't mean that if you don't have a master's, then it's going to disadvantage you if you've got the clinical experience to back it up. So a lot of people with a research background don't have the clinical experience. It doesn't mean they're more advantage over the other in the long term.
Building on from our kind of previous conversations around identity, just thinking with that lens, so with intersectionality in mind, do you have any advice that you can offer to future applicants who may be concerned that aspects of their identity, for example, such as their race, their lived experience, other kind of aspects of identity in terms of neurodiversity or disability, or their cultural background or religion may disadvantage them during the application or interview process?
I can start this off. I think we probably have a fair amount to say, don't we? So as I said, you know, we're revising our assessment date, and we're doing that, you know, in consultation with a really broad range of stakeholders. You know, so we're considering so the accessibility of this approach. We've got clinical team members who work in neurodiversity who are kind of informing how we carry out these assessments, how we put them in place. We, you know, have and do continue to have trainees from the global majority as part of the stakeholders who inform our conversations around the development of our assessments as well. But I think, I think it's an answer to your question, but I suppose one thing I want to raise in relation to this as well is that I think it needs to be further back too. So, you know, but it's about also how we can think about opportunities for trainees from sort of minoritized ethnicities to have experiences and understanding, and for trust to, I think SABP, Rachel, you might be able to correct me, but I think they have opportunities for trainees to gain experience there in different ways as well. So I think it's really important that we, as much as possible, ensure, well, we focus on making assessment and selection open. But I think we also need to think about this kind of runway to that point as well. And that's partly our responsibility, and I'm not negating that, but I think it's also about bringing these other stakeholders in to do a really good job with that too.
I mean, I think I would say that at Salomons, we in the profession, I think we all of our programs recognise that certain groups have been underrepresented for a long time in the profession, and we really need to think about why that is. And like Abby was saying, there's lots of different stages that we need to think about that. But certainly in terms of selection, which is the thing that I'm sort of leading on, we're very closely monitoring our data, as Mark was saying, in terms of difference and diversity, and looking at where some groups might be disadvantaged, and thinking about how we can kind of try to think about that and counterbalance that. Also in terms of kind of the breakdown of our interview panels, so we're trying to make sure that underrepresented groups are very represented on our panels in terms of ethnicity, but also disability, also social class, sex. So we're working really hard because we know that more diverse panels recruit more diverse people, and we're trying to collect data about that. We're also interviewing in person because we think that that gives a better sense of applicants. And that's quite important. And we're also trying to make our interview process more accessible. So we now give applicants the questions in written form as well to refer to if they want to, and we're trying to make sure that's in large font. So there's sort of quite a lot of different layers that we're trying to think about, but it's not straightforward, and definitely, you know, there's always room for improvement, I would say.
And so I don't think any course stays the same each year. So like with us, we do the analysis every year, and then we change our scoring criteria, but we also change the interview process sometimes where we can. I suppose in the application itself, we encourage people to, I suppose, reflect on their identity in any way in the application form. It makes for a much stronger application and much richer for our shortlist to view. I think in training itself as well, from when I started till now, there are so many more students who may have had lived experience before but weren't comfortable in then coming forward, and a lot more trainees do now. So we're seeing that there's a lot more diversity that's being reported to us, and that because of that, a lot more support is there by Occupational Health, by the Trust, by King's, and elsewhere. So
just wanted to pick up actually on your point, Rachel, about moving to face as well, because we did a very I'd say crude survey because in informing our decision making about doing that. So I think it was 70 or so just on Twitter aspiring clinical trainees from minoritized backgrounds, and they said that they would not be deterred by the movement to face-to-face, because we wanted to kind of actually go out and make sure, because one of the sort of decision making around should we have a test for screening, various other things, there's a lot of assumptions about what will act as a barrier and what won't act as a barrier, what will act as a facilitator and what will act as a barrier. So whilst it's not, you know, the most kind of robust scientific approach, I think it was really helpful to actually get that voice in that process and have the kind of fairly resounding view from that group of aspiring clinical trainees that this would be acceptable, that actually it would not put them off. Some of them, a proportion of them actually said it would be beneficial, which may track generally, but it was just, I think it's again going back and actually asking people, does this make a difference to your ability or willingness to engage with the process? That's really important.
That sounds really interesting, Abby. What else did you find?
I'd have to go back to it. I'm very happy to share. We only asked sort of we were only really looking at a couple of things, and it was face-to-face interviews, because there was a big sort of generally, I think, within the I suppose the training community, there's been this discussion of actually move back to face-to-face interviews, and you know there's reasons against it and reasons for it. So we wanted to kind of at least explore that, and we looked at a introduction of a screening test, and that seemed to be, you know, again, it's not the most robust measure, but seemed to be viewed as a deterrent by this sort of group of respondents. But this is not, I think it's really complex actually testing. So I don't want to say that's definitive with regard to that, and it didn't make our decision for that, but it kind of really helped us confirm that face-to-face might be the best way to move forward.
It's just in interview process, we went back face to face last year. I think for us that we felt it was quite very important to get a feel of the people in the room because they're being placed fairly soon. But also the feedback from the candidates was really good, but also the experience of the experts of our experience as part of the panels was far more improved. And they felt much more supported during that. But just to note that for our course and many others, that if you do require reasonable adjustments for your interview, then please contact them because the majority of the time they will give them to you.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that, Mark. I think it's really important. And I think that certainly we kind of have that at the outset from, you know, the point of invitation to interview, and our admissions team sort of follow up again to flag that too. So there's sufficient time to put in place adjustments as well. So I think that, I can imagine that's standard.
That's really helpful to know, because there could be some kind of fears or concerns about potentially being seen as a burden or not seen as competent, whatever that may mean. Actually, just having that encouragement from the onset means that at least that's one less thing for someone else to consider during the process.
I suppose that, well, just thinking past the application interview process, that when trainees will get onto the course, there is additional support, whether this might be from the university itself, but there's also so many different networks and support things within the employing trusts elsewhere. Say occupational health can help, inclusion plans. Thank
you. So I'm just going to hand it back to Sheepa for the next question, which I think you all kind of covered in some ways, but there may be additional things that you wanted to mention.
So we've kind of just been discussing the process, which can be quite challenging for many people. And it would be really helpful, I think, to know if you have any advice to give to applicants on how to take care of themselves and their well-being during this process.
I mean, one thing I would say is that, you know, as Abby has said, and we've all said, we do recognise that it's a really tough process, and also that we're not always going to get it right. It's very difficult for us to get a really good sense of somebody and their ability and their readiness for training, whatever means of selection we use. So we're not always going to get it right. And so if you're not successful, it doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't suitable. And certainly we do, as Mark was saying, we do phone feedback with everybody that we interview so that we can have a conversation about how the interview went, and we can share feedback about that process, which I think is important. If someone's invested the time and energy to come to an interview, I think giving feedback is really, really crucial. And I would also agree with what Abby said earlier about and Mark, I think, about your journey being trying to enjoy it and find it fulfilling, rather than seeing it as a means to an end to get onto training. I think trying to find jobs that you enjoy, where you're learning something and you're developing, is so key, and I think will help you within the process. So I think that's key. And also something that Abby and Mark were both saying as well, about try not to get too sucked into what everyone else is doing and how everyone else is getting on, because everyone's journey is going to be really different. So I think having some networks and having a bit of an understanding about the process can be helpful, but getting too sucked into that comparison can be a bit unhelpful.
I definitely
go on, Mark, sorry.
So I was going to say, definitely don't compare yourself to others, because everyone's journey is different, as we say. I think a lot of courses in the past few years are being a lot more, I suppose, transparent about when they might let candidates know, for example. They don't email everyone, for example, but we never quite know until very close to their closing date of when we let people know, because it depends on the speed of the application rating. We do want to take consideration, but we will tweet, for example, a couple of weeks before the exact date candidates will know, to help them not be checking the email every single day.
I think that's so helpful, isn't it? I think anything at that point, there's such a lot of expectation. I suppose anything I add, and I feel like I say the same thing over and over, but I do just think it's really important. Sometimes you won't be successful, as as we've all kind of alluded to, and that isn't, you haven't failed. And in fact, if you go and get more experience, that may not be to tick a box next time, but it actually will probably help you when you do, if you do move into the world of clinical psychology and in training. Experience can support you during training, it can support you in practice. And so it's not a terrible thing to go back into the world and, take on some other responsibilities or do something. Yeah, I think it's hard to see it as an opportunity when you haven't got something that you've worked so hard to get. But, if you can at all, think of that silver lining, do a bit of CBT and, and yeah, take it forward like that if you can.
We also haven't talked about kind of mentoring and mentorship opportunities. And I know the Valued Voices mentoring scheme, for example, I think schemes like that can be really helpful in terms of what to expect from the process, how to support yourself through that process. So I would definitely kind of seek out those opportunities if you can as well.
Yeah, you're right. Networking and speaking to other people in the process and other people who could just kind of tell you a bit more about how it works can again bridge the gap, can make you feel like you're kind of in the psychology world, the clinical psychology world a bit more, and you're not separate from it. Okay. Following on to the next question, some people have said in the survey that after watching this video, they want to feel more hopeful. Do you have any advice on what they should know to help get onto training and feel that hope a bit more?
I mean, I think the message that Abby said about that there isn't one type of clinical psychologist. What we value is difference and diversity, and everyone is bringing something different. So, you know, there's not one trainee clinical psychologist. So hopefully that gives everyone hope that that they're welcome in the profession.
Mm.
Oh, that's so nice. I think I really, yeah, I'd back up that too. I think, I suppose if it's helpful to move to from yourself almost to a bigger picture, I personally think, and I'm not, as I said, I'm not a clinical psychologist myself, but yet my kind of involvement in this domain is been sort of really fundamental to my own sort of research work. And I think that clinical psychology is at a really important point in terms of sort of defining itself as a role in terms of EDI, in terms of where we're going as a profession, or where you're going as a profession. And so I think that is a kind of quite a powerful message to have. We're talking a lot about kind of quite granular stuff here, but there's a reason why you want to be a clinical psychologist, and that's really exciting. And I think there's a kind of lot of hope there about what we can achieve as a profession.
I was going to say that if you're unsuccessful one year, it doesn't mean that you're not a suitable candidate for training, or you're not a suitable clinical psychologist or therapist in general. There's their professions that way. It is just a very highly competitive environment, and it may not be here this time, but many courses will give feedback to help you develop for the next year, and then you may be successful in future years in that way. And this is one of the reasons why we get the individualized feedback in that way, so to help them make an informed choice and help them develop if they want to apply to us in the future. But also, we may not be the right course for some candidates, so it helps them make an informed choice to apply elsewhere.
And hopefully a thread that has come through from all of us is that we really value and welcome diversity and difference. And I think what we want to hear about that as part of the application process, whether that be in your application form or whether that be in your interview. I think we don't want people to shy away from that. We want people to kind of be able to kind of bring that to the application process.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really helpful to know all of your perspectives, and just seeing how you're speaking about the profession and how you connect to it. I think a lot of people really value hearing that.
Thank you, Shipa.
That's okay. I'll hand over to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Shipa. And I had just like two more things. I know we've mentioned EDI, and I know for some people it's like equality, diversity, inclusion. For some people it's equity and equality. What your stance on EDI means, and what does that mean when we break down that acronym?
I think we're using it as equality, diversity and inclusion, but I think that the newer definitions around it, the one that you just said, Ashley, are actually probably better and more what we're trying to get at.
Yeah.
Really.
I think for us, our committee is called the Culture, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee. However, when we talk about selection in particular, that sometimes it will also include equity of access, I suppose, in that sort of way. So depending on which area of the course and what you're doing, the terms may change.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And is there anything today that we've asked, in terms of what we've asked the questions, is there anything that we've not asked or not covered that you thought would be helpful to have any kind of final words on?
Just thank you for doing the video, because I think we all want people that are interested in applying to kind of hear these messages. So I think, putting something on YouTube is a really great way of accessing more people than we're probably able to do. So I think that that's really great. So thank you very much for doing that. And just thank you to Abby and Mark, because I've really enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah. So there's one thing, is more course specific, but for us, but I suppose it links to the mentoring scheme and so much work, is For our course, our students run something called an Increasing Access Committee, so they're linked into the London Widening Access Group. But the work many students and all the courses do for outreach is brilliant. So they're going out to schools, they're doing lots of different things, and ours do workshops, particularly around the interview process, and they do actually one about supporting wellbeing during the selection process as well. So it's advertising the courses quite a lot, and I know many other courses students are doing the same thing as well. So there's lots of different things you can attend for free in your own time, and it may help.
Thanks for sharing that, Mark. That's really helpful.
Great, well, thank you. Abby, did you have anything you wanted to
No,
add?
I think I've talked so much, but I think that just the same as Rachel, it's a real pleasure to be part of this group, to think about how we as training centres, how we as a profession kind of become more open, and, you know, really we are reaching out rather than sort of, you know, sitting back. We want to kind of make our processes as transparent as possible. We want to ensure that they're easy to understand. It's even sort of noteworthy kind of really thinking about clarifying, you know, language and acronyms and all these things, because we can be sort of very caught up in the way in which we think about things in the institutions. And actually, if you're not in them, you don't understand necessarily. So I think sort of demystifying in this way is really great, and it's a real sort of privilege to have been part of it.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to share the space with you all today, and thank you for tackling the huge topic of admission and demystifying what you could, but also in a meaningful way. And I think for me, and I imagine for Shippa as well, just being able to value the honesty and what your courses are doing and what you have done, but also the areas where things could be different as well. And hopefully it's meant that it's felt like a rich conversation, and hopefully for the person watching, they are feeling more hopeful about giving this a go if they're applying for the first time, or continuing to apply if they want to try again, but also knowing how to look after themselves during that process as well. So thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to meet with you all today.